Part 45. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 447. Ancestor, it's really you. I sensed your aura, my respected friend. Have you finally come to rescue me? Subai now knew that Ancest was probably the vampire who was tied to the cross and punished to death by God. By absorbing his essence and blood, he had inherited his heritage and transformed him. Become a shadow of yourself and help you fight. Naturally, you will definitely leave his aura on your body. This vampire in the real world actually knew the owner of that drop of blood. So, did the drop of blood that Fatty gave him originally come from the real world? But Subai remembered that Fatty told him that he had cheated those Western listeners in the story world to get the trophies. If Fatty hadn't lied, that drop of blood should have been obtained by a Western listener in the real Western world. Of course, now is not the time to think about these minutiae, because Subai knew, and even the fat man and others behind Subai knew that when this vampire who could not move while lying down could actually open his mouth to speak, it meant that Subai was basically the opportunity that had never existed before suddenly appeared again. There is still a chance, yes, there is still a chance. Save me, Antheste, save me, Antheste. On the high platform, the voice of the vampire zombies echoed around. He was not speaking with his mouth, but a kind of soul message spreading out. In this way, he actually has a certain degree of autonomy. Maybe when he first woke up, he even had greater mobility. The Japanese who had their blood sucked dry when Subai and others saw them, this is the best proof, but after he was refreshed at the beginning, he was immediately suppressed. This is also the reason why Subai was unwilling to smoke him before. If he smoked it, Subai would feel better and then be suppressed here. Death would not happen. Even when the time comes in the next story world, he would still be alive. He was transported into the story world, but the problem is that the bad taste of the broadcast is difficult to grasp. If he finally completes a task and returns to the real world, the broadcast still transports him back to this research institute. Wouldn't he have to continue? Sleep? From now on, my life will consist of fighting for survival and sleeping in the story world. Who can bear it? Soul communication is simple and direct, and can ignore the boundaries of language. This is the most primitive way of communication. The most important thing for Subai is that as long as he exudes the aura of the Phantom of the Cross behind him, he can fake it. When the vampire identity named Ancestor went to communicate with the other party basically couldn't find anything unusual. At this time, the monk, Fatty, and Gyatso also adjusted their mentality. They were jealous and envious, but they were all smart people and would not be so jealous that they would forcefully destroy Subai's chances. If their eye sockets were just that shallow, they wouldn't be alive until now. It's me, my respected friend, I'm here to save you. Subai responded with a soul message in this way. Ancestor, you actually survived, came down. I have been contaminated, but I saw the truth. I saw the truth. I want to the truth, tell you, and even though my body is contaminated, I can still entrust my pure blood of inheritance to you. God is fake. God is also fake. This world is big, really big. We are locked in a cage. The sound was intermittent, showing the weakness of this vampire at this time. He was already in a state of suspended animation and was even more suppressed. The reason why he could still communicate at this time was because his body was being transformed into corpses and began to be re-indoctrinated. Introducing a strange vitality, this vitality made him slightly freer than before. However, this kind of freedom means that the time when he will be destroyed is not far away. He is about to be completely transformed into a corpse. In his own words, he is about to be completely defiled. By then, he will be a new life. Wiped out the past, and a new life was born on his corpse, turning into a complete zombie. This is also the reason why the Terrorist Broadcasting Association released this real-life mission. Even without Ning Cheng's help, the Terrorist Broadcasting Association will still let the listeners come here to help them solve this problem. A ball of light blue light was released from the center of the vampire's eyebrows. This was when he took the initiative to open his soul defense line and withdrew all defenses. Obviously, communicating with his soul is also a very difficult thing for him now. He is gradually being annihilated. Therefore, he simply lets go of his soul and his memory, and destroys the weakest of any living creature. The place was open, allowing Subai, no, to be precise, to let what he thought was ancest enter. What I want to tell you, what you want to know, are all in my soul. Yourself. Come and see. When this vampire said those words, the monk, fat man, and Gyatso on the side all looked serious. The world is big, the truth, a cage. The fat man looked directly at the monk and asked, is he talking about Columbus's discovery of the New World? Magellan's voyage that proved the earth is really round. Because the vampire uses soul communication, and his body is completely suppressed now, he can't even hear, so when he speaks at this time, he can't hear anything. The fat man knows this very well, so he carelessly discussed these with the monk. The monk shook his head, and he took another serious look at the vampire lying on the high platform. The Onmyoji banner and cross on his body had no magic weapon breath flowing around at all, so it basically had no suppressive effect, but he Subai personally admitted that his bloodline level was higher than his. The bloodline level of Ning Cheng, who was only created from his diluted blood, was actually higher than Subai's. This body could undoubtedly hang himself at the bloodline level. Beat soda white. Therefore, the monk felt that the fat man's previous guess was wrong. The truth he said should not be a geographical discovery, the monk said. In ancient times, the Chinese people always believed that they were the center of the world, and the theory of a round sky and a square earth was even more recognized by the mainstream. Of course, this was also due to the environment and conditions at the time. Similarly, Westerners were actually the same. However, since this vampire is so noble, he should have been very powerful before he entered the state of suspended animation for unknown reasons. And how could a strong man take this world for granted like the people of the ignorant era? So, what does this truth, this cage, refer to? Instinctively, the monk's breath suddenly quickened. He felt as if a real worldview information was about to be revealed in front of him. Since the Industrial Revolution, human society has entered a technological civilization, and feudal superstition has been swept into the trash can by mainstream countries. Myths, legends are regarded as stories to cultivate sentiments, materialism has become the mainstream of the world, and religious beliefs have become chicken soup for the soul. Even if the bug-like existence of broadcasting is eliminated, this world does not seem to be completely normal. Eastern listeners can often find inheritance and magic weapons from ruins or secret realms in the real world. The same goes for Western listeners. If this real world, how could those relics appear in such a pure and completely materialistic world, and how could so many magical weapons be left behind? If nothing else, this vampire is the most obvious abnormality in front of him. Obviously, he should not have escaped from the broadcast story world. Come on, Subai. At this time, Gyatso took the initiative to take 2 steps forward, stretched out his hand, and placed it on Subai's shoulder. On the center of his eyebrows, a wolf totem flashed, and along with it, there was also a wolf totem looming between Subai's eyebrows. This is Gyatso helping Subai to bless his soul. After all, although this vampire openly opens his soul to anyone for harvesting, who knows if this vampire has any more hidden methods? The fat man recited the Taoist Heart Sutra silently, and took a step forward, placing his palm on Subai's back. A warm jade-like breath entered Subai's body, nourishing and protecting Subai's soul. The monk silently recited Amitba, and put his right hand on Subai's other shoulder. For a moment, Sudbai's body was also shining with the light of Buddha. The three of them are not fools. They are just jealous. When Sudbai frustrated and seemed to get nothing, everyone showed their gloating expressions on their faces, but now Sudbai has the opportunity to eat. When you arrive, come naturally and help. The crux of the problem is that it won't do you any good to trick Sudbai to death, so why not hold your nose and help? You have to leave a lasting impression, right? With the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso helping him to bless him, Sudbai closed his eyes and wrapped his soul in the shadow's aura and entered the other party's soul consciousness. Boom! Familiar feeling, familiar perspective. Sudbai only felt dizzy for a while, and then he saw clearly everything in front of him. This was another person's body. The picture he saw was this person, which was what this vampire saw at the beginning. This feeling, it was exactly the same as when Sudbai read the memory of the Cross-Blood clan before, it was a completely immersive experience. At this time, in front of Sudbai, there was a man wearing a crown and a big red cloak riding a horse. Sudbai only saw the back of this man, but he gave Sudbai a feeling of being as high as a mountain. Sudbai stood beside him, beside Sudbai, from the corner of his eye, Sudbai saw many people wearing black clothes. Their eye circles were scarlet, but their skin color was extremely pale. Vampires, all vampires. A group of vampires, like bodyguards or soldiers, were guarding the king riding a horse. In front of the site, there was a military formation holding spears and shields. Soldiers moved forward in a rhythm with expressionless faces. The soldiers' attire style reminded Sudbai of the Roman or Greek city-state era. Soldier. This is a battlefield, a war is happening here. Sudbai was stunned for a moment. This vampire was just a soldier of an ordinary human king in the world. As the military formation continued to move forward, the team also continued to move forward. Sudbai felt that this body was surrounding the king in front of him. Until he stepped onto a mountain peak, Sudbai's sight, or rather the sight of this body, also suddenly it became extremely wide. Ahead, pyramids tower into the clouds one after another. This is not an exaggerated figure of speech, but they are truly inserted into the clouds. Compared with the pyramids in front of you, the pyramids in Egypt today are just children's building blocks. Below, there was blood. The human soldiers had just ended a fight. It was obvious that they were the victors. Under their feet lay countless monsters, some with human faces, some with bird bodies and human faces, as well as very huge three-headed wolves and other terrifying beasts. But at this time, their heads and bodies were scattered and their bodies were lying in pieces on the deserted ground. They were the defeated, and the outcome of the defeated was death. Sudbai's mind was greatly shocked. Is this a myth and legend imagined by this vampire, or a real historical memory? A group of bats flew over and turned into a man in black next to the king. The man in black reported something to the king very respectfully. After the report was over, the man in black stepped back, his eyes met with Sudbai, the owner of the body, and they smiled at each other. It was obvious that the two knew each other and had a good relationship. More importantly, this man in black, Sudbai knows him. He was the vampire who was later tied to the cross and sentenced to death by God. He was the owner of the drop of blood that was fused by himself. Antheste. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 448. His vision began to blur at this moment, which surprised Sudbai. The drop of essence and blood he obtained last time only contained one picture fragment, but this time, there seemed to be more than one. This is also easy to understand. Although this vampire is about to be completely transformed into a corpse and annihilated, at least now, he must have retained much more memories than the drop of blood he obtained before. The line of sight gradually began to become clearer, and new pictures gradually began to unfold. While swaying, Sudbai found that he was sitting in a prison cart made entirely of silver material. The prison cart was covered with mysterious runes. This was a form of runes that Subai didn't understand at all. He had never seen one before. Having seen similar types, even fatty, Subai felt that he couldn't understand this kind of rune. In the prison car, Subai lowered his head, and the visibility was very low. He could only feel the prison car shaking constantly. He must have been caught and treated as a prisoner. Were they captured by those monsters? Was the king's army defeated? All kinds of conjectures appeared in Subai's mind, but it was a pity that he could only see through this person's sight, and could not look up or look around by himself. However, this state of bowing his head in contemplation did not last long. Roar! A thunderous roar rose into the sky. The vampire finally raised his head, and Subai was finally able to see the surrounding situation. At the moment, Subai was stunned. Lines of soldiers were advancing, and the end of the line could barely be seen. What irritated Subai the most was the uniforms of these soldiers. The familiar armor, the familiar spears, the familiar military columns, the familiar crossbows, and even the marching rhythm that not only seemed to have the same pace but even breathing created an overwhelming and terrifying power. Their models can still be seen by modern people in the Shaanxi Terracotta Warriors and Horses History Museum. Their weapons and armors are all extremely precious cultural relics. More than 2,000 years ago, it was they who swept through the Six Kingdoms with extremely terrifying efficiency and power. On the basis of the Six Kingdoms, they went out of the Great Wall to beat the grassland peoples. At that time, the Xiongnu and Donghu did not dare to go south to herd. At the same time, he conquered all the barbarians and conquered a vast territory that far exceeded the 6 countries. This is a Qin army, an army of the Qin dynasty, with an innate aura of killing. However, what Subai found difficult to understand was how could the owner of his body, as a powerful vampire, be captured by the Qin people? Moreover, that Western European classical army was so powerful that it could defeat the tide of ferocious beasts in Egyptian myths and legends. How could this body, as the king's attendant guard, appear in the Far East? Roar! The roar came again, and the body naturally raised its head again, and a huge black dragon appeared in the sky. This is a dragon. This is a real dragon. The dragon is mighty and powerful, its roar is deafening, and below it is a rushing river. However, even when the dragon was in front, these Qin troops continued to advance. The roaring dragon overhead did not seem to affect them at all. The river began to become turbid, and then countless lake monsters rushed out from under the river. These lake monsters looked like yakshas, or like ghosts that had sunk into the river and drowned. How can I say that I have no clothes? I share the same robe with you. The king raised his army and repaired my spear. I share the same hatred with you. How can I say that I have no clothes? Tongues with Zi. The king raised his army and repaired my spear and halberd. Work together with me. The whole army sang ancient war songs, and then, the Qin army directly crushed them with a neat military formation. Their momentum was like a rainbow, and they were unstoppable. In the middle of the military formation, there was a beautifully decorated luanxia, and a majestic voice sounded. Who are you? How dare you scream in front of me? I am the only ancestral dragon in the world. A man wearing a bead curtain and a black dragon robe walked out of the carriage. He held a whip in his left hand and a jade seal in his right hand. He raised his head and faced the powerful black dragon in the sky, showing no fear at all. The jade seal flew into the air and hit the black dragon directly. The black dragon's huge body was torn apart in an instant, and blood rained down from the sky. This picture. Very shocking. It's also beautiful. Even the owner of this body started to tremble at this moment, seeming to be impressed by the power of the first emperor. Subai, on the other hand, was in a completely confused state. He was still thinking before that the ancient Western armies and the ferocious beasts they fought in the previous picture should be derived from memories in myths and legends and should not exist in real history. Because although Subai has good historical skills, he is not a history major, and he does not have the ability to judge from the aspects of military formations and equipment. The Western military formations in the previous picture belong to which period and which empire, but in the second picture, everything clearly shows that this is the Qin dynasty in Chinese history. Isn't this a fabrication? Isn't it a myth? So is the king in the first picture Alexander, Hannibal, or Caesar. The first emperor threw his long whip, and the river was blocked in an instant and split open, revealing a smooth path. The Qin army crushed them all the way, and all the river monsters and evil spirits were crushed. The soldiers of the Qin army trampled directly over their corpses, and then began to cross the river. The army continued to advance. In the distance, Subai saw a magnificent pass, Hang Pass. Subai has also been to the Hang Pass ruins, but there is no comparison between the Hang Pass in his impression and the Hang Pass in front of him. This pass can't be seen at a glance, as if it stretches to the end of the sky. Subai felt in a daze that this should not be a pass, but more like a great wall. However, Subai did not wait to follow the Qin army into the pass. The scene blurred again in an instant. This time the blur seemed very urgent and hurried. Moreover, the third memory that should have been there seemed to be unable to be played at this time. Subai could only vaguely hear the screams and roars in the sky, but could not see anything and could only guess based on his feelings. Now, in the third scene, it should be a sure hell, with death becoming the main theme. Even the owner of this body almost fell into suspended animation at this time. In the end, he was found out by the British and sent here. Research. Ancestor, I can't do it anymore, I'm about to lose myself, I'm about to become a new, dirty creature. My esteemed friend, Antheste the Howler of the Dark. I ask you to take away the last essence of my life, which is my inheritance and my memory. This is the last thing I can do before I am completely contaminated. Finally, I hope you will destroy me. Rosgori, even if it is the end and death, I should face death as a noble vampire instead of becoming a polluted and dirty monster. This is a stain on my bloodline, please help me preserve my last glory. Subai's soul power began to be extracted from the vampire named Rosgali, and then his whole body was shocked. The fat man, monk, and Gyatso beside him also breathed a sigh of relief. Obviously, the three of them had just helped Subai protect the law. It is also a very tiring thing. After all, spiritual matters cannot be careless at all. It is like dancing on the tip of a knife, which really consumes one's energy. Subai, what did you see? The monk asked impatiently. But at this moment, the fat man exclaimed, damn, the big gift bag has appeared. On the high platform, a wisp of blood flowed out from the forehead of this vampire. This amount was definitely more than one drop. After the blood flowed out, it actually began to evaporate slowly. Obviously, if they were allowed to continue to be exposed to the outside, it would only take about 10 minutes for them to evaporate completely. Subai waved his hand and captured the blood. However, he did not swallow it directly into his belly, but threw it to the fat man. Fat boy, purify yourself. The fat man had a tacit understanding with Subai on this point. He immediately took out a jade bottle. The jade bottle previously contained elixirs and had been eaten by the fat man. At this time, he directly took the bottle and through Subai's precious the blood was collected into it, and then a paper talisman was pasted on it. The Supreme Lord is as urgent as the law. A blue flame rose up and began to circle around the bottle. It looks like there's nothing wrong with it. If you delay it any longer, Dabai, your original French dinner will turn into a peasant stir-fry fatty. Zi reminded, because the original rich bloodline and strength in the blood were constantly weakening, and the fat man felt a little sad for Subero. Monk, please help me. Subai looked at the monk and said. Amitba. The monk gave a wry smile and was really speechless. Along the way, he had almost become Subai's professional thug. There was nothing he could do about it. He could only hope to encounter some opportunities related to him in the future, and then take Subai with him. I went to find it together. There is always a chance to get this favor back. My Buddha is compassionate. The monk put his hands together, a Buddhist sound sounded, and golden light fell around the bottle. Finally, a struggling face appeared in the blood in the bottle. His face was full of resentment, deep resentment. Ancest, ancest, damn it, damn it. Sure enough, there is a mystery hidden in this blood. That vicious face began to fade away, and at the same time he began to beg for mercy. Ancestor, I was wrong, let me go, let me go. Subai was unmoved. If he had stupidly drank the blood just now, it would be equivalent to burying another person's soul in his body. Whether he could discover it was still unknown, but if the other person hid it, he would wait until whenever he is seriously injured and it suddenly comes back to bite him, there is a high chance that his body will be taken away from him. Finally, the face completely disappeared, and only the last few drops of blood remained. The fat man and the monk stopped together, and the jade bottle was thrown directly to Subai. The fat man stretched and sneered. Dabai, this guy is so naive that he actually plays tricks on us in front of our audience. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 449. The last 3 drops of blood stopped evaporating and became quiet in the bottle. Subai was not in a hurry to devour it at this time. This kind of high-level blood must be eaten with caution. When he swallowed Ansai foolishly, after that drop of blood from Ste, the whole person was confused for a long time, and then he was confused several times in a row before he could completely absorb the drop of blood, so Subai put the bottle away first. Let's do business first, Subai said. Haha, if it weren't for you, we would have finished the business a long time ago, the fat man joked, and then made a seal with one hand, and a flying sword rose into the air, suspended on the fingertips, and the sharp aura emanated, as if even the air was moved by it. There was a slight tremor. Come on, this guy has already explained himself. The speed of corpse transformation will be accelerated soon. We have to hurry up. Fatty, I don't want to stay here and play with rice dumplings without exploding anything equipment. A string of Buddhist beads appeared in the monk's hand. The beads were black. At this time, a ripple formed and spread slowly. A hatchet appeared in Gyatso's palm. It was obvious that Gyatso had fused the hatchet as his natal weapon. A hellfire shotgun appeared in Subai's hand, aiming at the vampire whose hair had grown wildly and turned gray. 1, 2, 3. The fat man counted down 3 times, and the 3 of them took action together. Boom. Buzz. Boom. Aha. The 4 fierce attacks were all focused on this vampire. The high platform turned into dust, the shackles were completely broken, and a deep pit appeared under the ground. Subai waved his hand and opened up the cement dust and dust. The 4 of them were all a little embarrassed. They were injured but not injured, but they all ate a mouthful of dust. There was nothing they could do about it, considering the vampire corpse that had just transformed. Judging from the speed, the 4 of them did not have time to take any shielding measures to maintain their appearance. Fortunately, the 4 of them subconsciously controlled the direction and range of the attack, so as not to turn out the kind of combined attack that would be too powerful to kill their own people. A low-level mistake that blew up. The radio notification sounded in my mind, and the real task was completed. There is no reward, but everyone knows that sometimes there is no specific reward, but a better reward. In this way, in the next story world, the broadcast will favor itself. The 4 disgraced people were worried about who else was left in Ningcheng, so they did not go back from where they came in. Instead, they walked along the upward exit of the research institute. A section of the exit was collapsed by the bomb. Gyatso took a handful alone. The hatchet cleared the road, and then the 4 people walked out. Huh. The fat man took a deep breath. Let's find a hotel and take a shower first. The 4 of us look like we just finished working as masons. The 4 of them were all gray, and even their hair seemed to have changed color. Fatty himself didn't care, but he knew that both the monk and Sudbai were misophobic, and they were not in the story world at this time. It's necessary to make do. When they came out, at the western foot of Purple Mountain, the monk looked for his direction, and then bowed to the location of Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum. The fat man followed suit and bowed with Taoist etiquette, while Sudbai bowed deeply. Sudbai had been to Sun Yat-sen Mausoleum before, but when he went there, he had more of a traveling and sightseeing mentality. At this time, this bow was much more serious and solemn. Gyatso stood behind the 3 of them. He did not bow, but patted his clothes and walked towards the road over there. Just as a truck drove over, Gyatso waved and the truck stopped. Before the truck driver could ask what was going on, Gyatso knocked him unconscious. The 3 people who had finished praying came over and got into the car directly. The fat man yawned. This task is actually quite boring. Yes, for the fat man, it is indeed quite boring, especially when he lost his wife and lost his army, cut off 3 inches of his soul vein, and lost his strength. 30%. By the way, you guys should go back to Shanghai first when it gets daylight. I'm going to stay and do the dojo for a few days. This was something Fatty had sworn to do, so it was naturally impossible for him to break his promise. Gyatso drove the truck into the city, and the 4 people got out of the car. The truck driver stayed in the car, expecting to wake up soon. A family suite was opened with 2 bathrooms. Sudbai, who went in to take a shower first, lay on the bed with a bath towel. In the bathroom, Fatty and Gyatso also went in and started cleaning themselves after Sudbai and the monk came out. This was not only I just wash off the dust on my body, walk around in that cold storage room, and always take a shower to get rid of my bad luck. The monk walked to the bed and saw Sudbai lying on the bed playing with the bottle, and sat down directly by the bed. The monk maintained his identity and did not wear a bath towel like Sudbai. Instead, he wore a white training uniform that was not too dirty. In fact, Sudbai knew that the monk was very curious about the memory of the vampire he saw, so he couldn't wait to come over and ask himself. At this time, Gyatso also finished washing and came out. He shook off the dirty clothes and put them on him casually. When the Buddha walked in the Tibetan area, he liked to go bare-chested, so whether the clothes were dirty or not, Gyatso still I really don't care. I'll go out and buy some food and drink, and then I'll bring back some clothes. Immediately, Gyatso's eyes fell on the fat man. Fat man, please wash your clothes first. I don't think I can find the size you want to wear. The fat man came out after taking a shower. The large bath towel looked so compact on him. He rolled his eyes and asked, I'll get some ladies to come over and let's have a. The monk and Sudbai simply ignored the fat man's words. The fat man shrugged, I really don't understand gentleness. After saying that, he turned on the TV and lay on the other bed to watch it. The fat man knew in his heart that the other 3 people had knots in their hearts about him. This knot would be difficult to completely untie now and in the future, but the 4 people between them, they will at least maintain the same relationship as before, that is, they will be harmonious before their immediate interests are involved. Sudbai lit a cigarette, and memories of scenes began to appear in his mind. There was a ballpoint pen and a hotel group's brochure on the table. Sudbai picked up the pen and started drawing on it. The monk stood next to Sudbai and watched carefully. He found that Sudbai painted an ancient Western soldier. The contrast between the styles of ancient Eastern and Western armors and weapons was very large, so it was easy to judge. In my memory, I saw a Western king leading his army in Egypt, fighting a group of ferocious beasts from Egyptian mythology and legends. The pyramids there were really towering into the clouds, and the king was surrounded by a group of vampires as guards. Moreover, what is most unimaginable to me is that the human army actually won the victory. Apart from the humans cheering for victory, there were only the hacked corpses of various ferocious beasts on the battlefield. Is it a scene from myths and legends? The monk asked. The fat man turned down the sound of the TV a little at this time. Obviously, he was also listening to the conversation here. It shouldn't be fiction or imagination, because the vampire in the research institute really knows me. No, to be precise, he really knows the vampire named Ancest. I absorbed him in the first place. The only drop of blood left by Ancest. Having said this, Subai glanced at Fatty out of the corner of his eye. That drop of blood was given to him by Fatty. After a pause, Subai continued, more importantly, in the second memory scene, I found that I was being held as a prisoner in a prison car, and these runes were affixed to the prison car. Subai drew the general appearance of the runes as he spoke. Each rune must use the corresponding chi when drawing. Of course, Subai's one is only superficial and has no effect at all. Rune. When the fat man heard this, he no longer cared about other people's grudges against him, and walked over directly wrapped in a bath towel. After observing the runes drawn by Subai, the fat man's eyebrows knitted together. This is the rune style of the pre-Qin dynasty. Qi refiners in the pre-Qin period liked to use this style of runes. I don't understand it and can't draw it, but I have seen similar ones in ancient scrolls. The pre-Qin period refers to the historical era before the establishment of the Qin dynasty, from the legendary 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors to the Warring States period, and experienced historical stages such as Xia, Shang, Western Zhou, Spring and Autumn period, and Warring States. What I saw at that time was an army of the Qin dynasty, as well as the first emperor's chariot. The army passed by a big river. There were many river monsters in the river, and there was a black dragon in the sky above their heads. Then, I saw the Qin army arrayed and attacked, directly crushing the river monsters and evil spirits. I saw the first emperor smashing the black dragon in the sky with the jade seal, and then the first emperor threw a whip to cut off the flow, allowing the army to pass directly. In the end, I saw Hang Pass disappeared after that. The Qin dynasty's army, the fat man looked a little unbelievable. The human army, and it is an army in the cold weapon era, slaying dragons and crushing river monsters and evil spirits? The monk was silent for a while and said, since the first emperor and the Qin army appear in the second one, the king in the first picture should also be a historical person. The 4 recognized military strategists in history in Europe are Alexander, Hannibal, Caesar, and Napoleon. Obviously, Napoleon can be eliminated. Based on the chronological development of the first and second scenes, Caesar and Hannibal can also be eliminated, leaving only Alexander. Historically, Alexander's Macedonian kingdom did capture the entire ancient Egypt. Haha, it can't be that the vampire has been in a state of suspended animation for too long, so he is lying there dreaming about what he has been dreaming about. The fat man joked, and then he smiled and stopped laughing, because he also thought it was impossible. Compared with the memory picture Subai saw, his guess was actually more ridiculous. The monk pursed his lips and said, if that is true history, some secret places and ruins scattered around the world will have their basis and origin. Subai tapped his fingers on the table and said, back then, the Blood Corps massacred the entire high-ranking audience in Shaanxi and built a jingguan in the pit of the terracotta warriors and horses. Now it seems that he was really just bored at that time. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 450. Subai still clearly remembered that when he was forced to come into contact with the Blood Corps, it was in the Terracotta Warriors and Horses History Museum. The fat man was also with him at that time, and then the two of them were pulled into the number 1 pit of the Terracotta Warriors and Horses by a strange force, and each one the senior Shaanxi audience members who had been killed were placed in a standing position, standing there exactly like the surrounding terracotta warriors and horses, like guards protecting the emperor. However, there is a blinding trick there, and tourists outside cannot see it. Even if the archaeologists come to the pit in person, they will subconsciously ignore this place. In Sudbai's view, it is even possible that they are two completely different spaces. It has gone beyond the simple level of concealment. After all, the restoration work of the terracotta warriors and horses has been ongoing in the terracotta warriors and horses pit. Each terracotta warriors and horses and even every fragment will be marked with a number. In this way, a simple concealment method will definitely not be able to hide it for long. At the beginning, Sudbai didn't think too much. He just felt that the blood corpse was already out of his mind at that time, so he placed it in the number 1 pit during the massacre in Shaanxi. But now it seems that things are really not that simple. If the memory picture he saw is true, then the first emperor held the jade seal in his left hand to crush the giant dragon, threw the whip to cut off the river, and the Qin army under his command was able to crush the powerful Yaksha river monster. Perhaps, the reason why the blood corpse is so due, maybe it is not that he is crazy, but that he has a deeper secret. He wanted to hide his identity, but he was still killing people in Shaanxi with great fanfare. Is it really just because he couldn't find a radio at that time, so he vented his anger by killing radio listeners? Or maybe he killed so many people and still assumed that posture one by one. In fact, there is a greater possibility, and a more similar possibility. He is offering sacrifices. So, who is being sacrificed to? Sudbai couldn't help but sigh. Now, no matter how many things I think about the blood corpse, it can only be speculation. No matter how many plots the blood corpse hides, in the end, its identity is revealed by the broadcast in a dumbfounding way. After being pulled into the story world, it is killed once, and the rest, the part that was not completely destroyed, was treated as a roasted whole lamb by the broadcaster for several of his listeners to fight over and eat. And Sudbai was undoubtedly the winner in that battle. The bloodlines on his body were also obtained from devouring blood corpses. Was blood corpse's plan in Shaanxi useless or already effective? Did he die in despair or at dawn? This point has almost become a mystery. The dead man's mouth is too strict and nothing can be pried out. But, the first emperor, the terracotta warriors and horses, the Qin mausoleum. Sudbai stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. Perhaps, he would go there again in the future. Even now, Sudbai was no longer so sure. The country said it had suspended excavation of Qin Shi Huang's tomb. The reason was really official. It is said that the current scientific and technological conditions are not mature enough to properly protect the unearthed cultural relics. Or is there another reason? I don't know if the blood corpse thing is a coincidence, but the two memory scenes of the Blood Clan directly deny our history. Oh no, it denies the entire history of mankind. Now you want me to believe that our ancestors more than 2,000 years ago were able to crush ferocious beasts and tear apart dragons like Superman? What history is really like is clearly remembered in the history books. Even if the people in power can modify the history books, they won't change it transformers into joyful, right? The fat man retorted. He still thought this was too ridiculous. The fat man was different from Sudbai. Sudbai had experienced that memory scene with his own eyes, which touched him the most. The fat man was also different from the monk. The monk had actually been studying this for a long time. In ancient times, history was indeed easily changed. Moreover, at that time, the commonly used writing tool in China was bamboo slips, while in the West at the same time, it was sheepskin. Those who could read and even afford to read were only a minority among the minority. And at the same time, the difficulty of tampering with history is much lower than it is today. Nowadays, the world of network information is so developed, but not many people know about some secretive events, and even the few who know are only aware of them. Today, administrative means can be used to annihilate just 20 people. Wouldn't it be easier to do things that happened just a few years ago in ancient times? The state's monitoring of the internet has made many netizens afraid to talk about some things that they are very interested in. Unwritten rules and high-voltage wires have made most people afraid to touch the tiger's beard. Now the post-00s generation, it is estimated that in the future you may not even have heard the names of those events. Not to mention that in ancient times, people could be killed and silenced at will. And, most importantly, in the 200 years BC, a lot of things happened in China and the West that destroyed the inheritance of writing. When the monk said this, he looked at Sudbai. Sudbai nodded. Monk, are you talking about the first emperor's burning of books and the burning of the Library of Alexandria? Most Chinese people are aware of the matter of burning books and harassing Confucians, but they don't know how serious this matter is. After the first emperor burned books and harassed Confucians, most of the schools of thought that flourished during the spring and autumn period and the warring states period directly cut off their inheritance. Even decades after the founding of the Han Dynasty, only one of the hundreds of schools of thought still existed and was active. Some schools even had to find the broken classics buried with their ancestors in their tombs to pass on. Later, Dong Zhongshu's theory of influence between heaven and man prompted Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty to depose hundreds of schools of thought and only worship Confucianism. Apart from the so-called various other reasons, the biggest reason was that the other hundreds of schools of thought at that time his vitality has long been severely weakened. While Alexander the Great once led his army across Europe, Asia, and Africa, and established a huge empire, he almost used absolute administrative means to collect books from various places and enter them into a library named after him. It is no exaggeration to say that the Library of Alexandria at that time, it basically carried the crystallization of Western civilization in various fields at that time. Later, in order to deal with the enemy's warships, Caesar ordered a fire attack. It is not known whether the fire was intentional or unintentional, and set the Library of Alexandria on fire. It is said that the great works in the library burned for 6 months and were not completely extinguished. The books inside were almost burned to the ground. At that time, there were only 2 fires of civilization burning in the whole world. One was China in the east, which was in the Qin and Han dynasties, and the other was Rome that rose up in Alexander's divided empire after his death. The rest of the place is still in the dark dream era, and it is not an exaggeration to say that things are recorded on straw ropes. It is no exaggeration to say that these 2 major events, which occurred only 100 years apart, burned in one fell swoop the history, culture and heritage accumulated by all mankind in countless years BC. Formatting of civilization. Sudbai took out a cigarette, handed one to the fat man, and lit one himself. Besides, the demise of 2 great empires is a bit weird. Yes, the rise of these 2 great empires in the East and the West is terrifying, and their demise is so strange that it is really hard for people to understand. Chinese folk tradition holds that due to the tyranny of Qin Shi Huang and the abuse of people's power, and the subsequent succession of Hu Hai, the world suffered for a long time and Qin began to rebel. In the end, the Qin dynasty brought about its own destruction. But those who really read the history books will find that when the Qin state swept across the 6 countries, it was simply a bug. It defeated the 6 countries. The last Qi state to perish was frightened to the point of peeing. The 500,000 soldiers in the country immediately disarmed and surrendered. Not daring to resist, he knelt on the ground and called Qin Guo's father. But the 6 kingdoms was only the first step. At that time, China's traditional territory was actually not that big. Large areas in the south and southwest were non-kingdomized lands and were occupied by barbarians and the Qin army continued to fight. Wasn't the mountain road difficult to walk? Cutting mountains and paving roads, is it difficult to cross a big river? Divert waterways. In the north, after the fall of Qin, the grassland peoples who dominated the Han dynasty for a period of time were finally beaten away by Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty with all the strength of the country. They were also beaten when the Qin army came out of the fortress. All have psychological shadows. The Great Wall built by the Qin people is actually very different from the Great Wall of the Ming dynasty in later generations. Its construction method is not more convenient for defense, but more convenient for the Qin army to attack. The Qin Great Wall is more precisely when attacking the bridgehead. The purpose of the relatives is to continue to fight, to chase after the nomads. Then, the first emperor suddenly died during his eastern tour. Chen Sheng and Wu Guang in Day's township made it difficult for the Qin Empire, which had been destroying others just a second ago, to resist, and finally collapsed. The Macedonian kingdom of Alexander the Great followed almost the same rhythm. His army successively unified the entire territory of Greece, then swept across the Middle East, occupied the entire territory of Egypt without spending a single soldier, wiped out the Persian Empire, and marched to the Indus River Valley. The Dewan kingdom in the western regions during the Han dynasty that the Chinese are familiar with is the dependent country left behind by Alexander after his eastern expeditions. Then, Alexander, who was less than 33 years old, died suddenly and mysteriously, and the empire fell apart. Two great kings from the east and the west, in BC, almost swept their respective worlds, and then both died suddenly and mysteriously, and the huge empires they had created with their own hands were also wiped out. Is it really just a coincidence of history? Holy shit, you two are crazy, really crazy. The fat man said a little helplessly. He only knew about history at the same level as ordinary people. But when he looked at Subai and the fat man talking to each other, his brain was too big, and he could only listen in confusion. I understand, that's just an unknown person. But Fatty also has a big killer weapon. This big killer weapon is a big bug. Not to mention the view of history, it can sweep away your outlook on life, marriage, values, etc. What about radio, terror radio? What is the meaning of its existence? When you are studying the history of this real world, have you ignored the horrific broadcasts in this world that only we can access? Can any of you explain what exactly it is doing? Can any of you explain the significance of its appearance? Can any of you explain the reason why it ravages the audience and treats us like we are raising voodoos? You guys are having such a lively discussion here that you don't even know if this real world is really the only real world in eternity. What a waste of discussion. Maybe it's a bug in the broadcast, a modification in the broadcast, and the broadcast will suddenly come one day. Auntie was in a bad mood and Tutu changed it. After the fat man said these words, Subai and the monk fell silent. This is a fact. If the existence of terrorist broadcasts is just a purposeless existence, then whether this real world can still be called the real world will be called into question. And if even the world where I am is if the real world really has a foundation, and whether it has really existed for countless years, if these are not certain, then it is indeed unreasonable to talk about the concept of history. Both Subai and Monk have experienced a lot of the story world of broadcasting. They have seen a lot of bugs and unreasonable places in some places. Could it be that this is really just a bug in the broadcast? Broadcasting has casually established this real world, and there are some bugs, which is easy to understand. The monk shook his head and said firmly, "Fat man, we can deny everything, but we cannot deny ourselves. This real world is where we were born and raised. To deny it is to deny the meaning of our own existence. Therefore, no matter what right or wrong, we must insist on. The real world is unique, special, and exists forever. Therefore, just like I used the backward deduction method to infer that Ning Cheng had no other thoughts, you can also try to answer the questions you asked using the inverse method." When the monk said this, he paused. Then, Subai and the monk spoke almost at the same time and said two words. Atavism. Yes, assuming that this real world is unique, assuming that the picture Subai saw is real history. So, historically, the human army under Alexander could sweep away the beasts of Egypt and kill creatures from hell with human bodies. Alexander was surrounded by legendary high-level vampires who acted as his bodyguards. In history, the Qin army under the command of Qin Shi Huang could crush evil river monsters and calm the demon atmosphere. The first emperor could even tear apart giant dragons and cut off rivers with whips. If all of the above are true, so there is only one meaning left for the existence of broadcasting. Just use the method of raising goo. Forcing people now. Atavism. Force today's people to compete and fight, to let them regain the same glory as their ancestors deep in their bloodline, to regain the same powerful power as their ancestors back then. This is a cruel process, a process of rushing through the sand, with a terrible elimination rate, dooming most people to fail in the middle, which means death. Plop. The fat man sat back on the bed. He suddenly realized that he was actually convinced by these two devilish guys. The fat man was almost shouting in his heart. You are numb, numb. You two idiots actually sat there wrapped in a bath towel after taking a shower and deduced the meaning of the radio's existence like a chatter. Grass. Holy crap. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 451. The door was pushed open, and Gyatso walked in with two big bags. One bag contained food, and the other bag contained clothes. This food was easy to buy, but for clothes, he probably opened a store directly. You can go in and choose by yourself. Of course, Gyatso should have left enough money. Although Buddha seems to be poor, Gyatso's money is really not small. Subai walked over, chose a set of clothes and put them on, looked in the mirror, and said with a smile. Lord Buddha, I feel like you have good taste in appreciation. The clothes Gyatso chose for Subai were indeed okay. The fat man hurriedly took out the food from the bag and began to distribute it. He was very hungry. The monk did not eat the cooked food, but boiled water and made a bucket of noodles. The monk was not the kind of person who adhered to formalities. In the world of the story, he would not hesitate to eat anything to keep him alive, not to mention meat. Eat it, but in the real world, if you can be particular about it, just be particular about it. Gyatso was eating bread silently, while Fatty and Subai were eating the cooked food and barbecue. For a moment, there was only the sound of chewing food in the room, and the fat man who was originally field control didn't talk much at this time. What's wrong? There's something wrong with the atmosphere, Gyatso asked. The fat man explained what he had discussed before. After listening to the fat man's words, Gyatso took a sip of water and simply said, interesting. Then, he picked up a chicken foot from the cooked vegetables and took a bite. Obviously, even though he was as calm as Gyatso, he felt a little uneasy after hearing this. That night, the monk and Gyatso were sitting cross-legged and meditating. It happened that Subai and the fat man shared a bed. When the next morning, the fat man stayed behind to prepare a dojo for the research institute. Subai, the monk, and Gyatso planned to go back first. Entering the high-speed rail station, it was crowded. Because several high-speed trains were delayed due to special reasons, there were many passengers stranded in the train station. While waiting for the bus, Subai leaned against the wall and played with his mobile phone, feeling a little bored. The monk and Gyatso were walking around casually. It is estimated that these two monks have a lot to discuss about last night's events. Buddhism itself, it has its own perfect worldview. If the real purpose of broadcasting is to encourage modern humans to return to their ancestors, then presumably the monks and Gyatso can also find some fragments from Buddhist myths and stories that may be real. This is a very important thing. If you can confirm that a certain mythical story actually exists, then focus on searching and digging, maybe you can find the relics in that mythical story. Subai shrugged. Even though there were many people in the train station and the air conditioning was turned on, The temperature in Jiangsu and Zhejiang is really not that friendly these days. There was a large LCD TV above his head, which was playing a movie, The Myth starring Jackie Chan. Subai actually watched it seriously and put his mobile phone in his pocket. Without him, after personally experiencing the prosperity of the Qin army in that memory scene, Subai couldn't help but become more interested in that dynasty. However, the main theme of the story of Myth is still based on the emotional line. For Subai, who watched the movie with a purpose, it did feel a bit unsatisfactory. Subai remembered a movie by Jackie Chan that he went to the cinema to watch a few years ago, called Heavenly Generals. That movie was like a political propaganda film from beginning to end. The character played by Jackie Chan was full of emotions from the first line to the last line. It can be directly translated as, national harmony is a good practice. Sorry, sir, you can't smoke here. A cleaning lady walked up to Subai and reminded her. I don't smoke, Subai said. The cigarette butts under my feet, the cleaning lady sighed and swept away the cigarette butts below. Obviously, she thought Subai was the type of person who refused to admit it. Subai smiled. Who knew that there were a few cigarette butts under the position where he was standing? After looking at the time, it was almost time to check in. In the distance, Gyatso and the monk were chatting and walking back. They nodded to the two people and the three of them walked to the ticket gate together. After passing the ticket gate, there is still some distance to walk. There are more people at this time, and you have to take the stairs, which makes it a bit crowded. In front of Subai, there was a girl wearing sky blue jeans and a white down jacket. The girl was very tall and had long legs. She was dragging a purple suitcase. Perhaps because the area was too crowded, the girl accidentally dropped a book she had tucked under her arm while walking. Subai knelt down and picked up the book. It was an original English book titled The Count of Monte Cristo. Thank you. The girl took the book from Subai, turned around, carried the suitcase and started walking down the steps, looking like a very refreshing and feminine person. Subai didn't move forward to strike while the iron was hot and say, I'll help you carry your suitcase. Instead, he stopped where he was and waited for the monk and Gyatso to come over before the three of them walked down together. Entering the carriage, the three of them had tickets to sit together, but Gyatso and the monk sat on the left side, and Subai was on the other side across the aisle. When Subai sat down, his neighbor suddenly made a voice. What a coincidence! It turns out that the person sitting next to me is actually the girl who just helped me pick up the books. The girl's smile is very sweet, with two charming dimples, especially the refreshing energy exuding from her body, which makes people feel very comfortable. Subai nodded without saying anything. After sitting down, he closed his eyes and prepared to take a nap. The monk and Gyatso sat there and continued to chat in a low voice. It seemed that their conversation was getting more and more sexual. Usually, these two eminent monks cherished their words like gold. The girl sitting next to Subai continued to read her book. Subai discovered that she was not using the book to show off, but that she was really reading it as a novel, and she was reading it with gusto. The conductor came over and asked the passengers if they wanted drinks or anything. Subai opened his eyes and said, "A bottle of mineral water, thank you." "I also want a bottle of mineral water," the girl also said. "Okay." The conductor handed over 2 bottles of mineral water. Subai subconsciously reached for his wallet, then remembered that he didn't bring his wallet when he came out this time. The fat man was paying the bill. When he was about to borrow money from the monk sitting across the aisle, the girl took out the money. "Give 2 bottles together." The conductor looked at Subai meaningfully. Perhaps, in her heart, she thought that Subai was just pretending to let the girl treat him. A man who is not even willing to treat a bottle of water, no matter how good looking he is, it doesn't matter. Mean. "Thank you." Subai opened the bottle cap and took a sip of water. To be honest, Subai felt a little embarrassed, especially when he took out his wallet but didn't take it out, as if he was afraid that he would have to help the girl next to him when he gave money. give them the same thing together. As for whether the girl thought so, Subai didn't know. It seemed that the other party didn't care much about such trivial matters. What language are they chatting in? I thought it was Tibetan at first, but now it sounds like it's not. The girl seemed to be talking to herself or asking Subai. What the girl was talking about was naturally the monk and Gyatso sitting across the aisle. Subai knew what these two were discussing now. If it were in Chinese, other passengers nearby would probably think that these two people were crazy. It's Sanskrit, Subai said. Sanskrit, the girl was a little surprised. It's really amazing. That monk and the people around him can actually speak Sanskrit. Sanskrit is one of the 22 official languages in India today, but it is no longer a language of communication in daily life. In 2001, only 14,000 people mastered this language. It is the language with the smallest number of speakers among the official languages in India. Strictly speaking, Sanskrit, like Latin and ancient Chinese, has become a living fossil in linguistic research. That's why the girl was surprised that the monk and Gyatso knew Sanskrit. Seemingly noticing Subai's gaze, the monk turned his head and smiled at Subai, then continued to discuss with Gyatso. The two of them actually took out a map they bought from someone who didn't know where they were facing it. What does the mobile map analyze? Seeing this scene, Subai couldn't help but feel a little dizzy. If these two monks really deduced that a certain Buddhist legend was true, they would definitely take him to search and dig out it. After all, he owed them both so much. Big personal favors must be returned. Are you with them? The girl looked at Subai and said. Well, we're in this together. Then do you also know Sanskrit? I can't, Subai said honestly. The girl looked a little disappointed. Then can you give me the WeChat messages of those two people? I want to ask them some things about Sanskrit in the future. I'm sorry, I was abrupt because I am a language major. That's no problem. Subai didn't feel like his son was abducted. After all, young Master Su had already passed the age of wanting to take possession of a pretty girl when he saw one. Taking out his mobile phone, Subai clicked on the WeChat account between the monk and Gyatso, and asked the girl to take a photo. From the beginning to the end, Subai never said, "Let's add WeChat first." Thank you so much. Tell your friends after the station and I will join them. No problem. About 10 minutes later, the high-speed train arrived at the station. Passengers took off their luggage from the luggage rack and prepared to get off. Subai acted like a gentleman this time and helped the girl take off the luggage. The girl took the suitcase and smiled at Subai. By the way, I haven't asked your name yet. My name is Lankir. What about you? Subai. Goodbye then, Subai. Goodbye. The girl pushed her suitcase and got out of the car. Subai stood there waiting for Gyatso and the monk to pack up the map and come over. Lankir. Subai looked at the monks and Gyatso beside him, and said to himself. Why do I feel like I've heard this name before? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 452. Lankir. A female star. Gyatso walked to Subai and heard Subai reciting the name and asked. Obviously, although Buddha is not behind the trend and uses electronic products and the like well, he does not read entertainment news all day long. He knew very little about the entertainment industry, so he thought Subai was talking about the name of a female star. Of course, it was also because the name really looked like her stage name. Similarly, the monk was almost the same, but the monk's face changed obviously after hearing the name. He closed his eyes and seemed to be recalling the appearance of the girl sitting with Subai, but found that he could not remember the girl's appearance clearly. This shocked the monk so much that a cold sweat broke out on his back. The monk could read books without any hope. Even if there were no terrorist broadcasts, he would definitely become a famous and accomplished monk in the future with his qualifications. His wisdom, there is no doubt about it, and the monk is sure that he had looked at Subai specifically before. The girl sitting next to Subai was also looking at him curiously. The monk had seen that woman's face. Even if I didn't pay attention at that time, with my memory, I would never forget it so completely. Subai, do you still remember what that girl looks like? When I heard the monk ask this question out of nowhere, I was a little confused and said, "What's wrong, monk, have you moved your mind?" The three of them were talking as they walked towards the car door to get out of the car. She is wearing sky blue jeans, a white down jacket, and is holding an original English copy of The Count of Monte Cristo in her hand. She has short hair, which is wrong, and long hair that is shawl, which is also wrong. She should have long hair reaching her waist, which is also wrong. The three of them got off the bus at that moment. Subai just stood on the platform and refused to leave. At this moment, Subai felt exactly the same as the monk just now. Subai found that he only remembered Lankair's clothes, but what exactly she looked like was a blur in his mind. Gyatso also realized what happened at this time. "I'll try to chase him, you guys get out of the station first." The monk immediately stretched out his hand to stop Gyatso. "No, since her target is not on the three of us, we don't have to ask for trouble." Hearing this, Gyatso frowned, but nodded and gave up the idea of chasing after him. Subai pursed his lips. For a moment, he felt very agitated. Even a normal person would probably be scared out of his mind when faced with this situation, while senior listeners would think more and be much more sensitive. "Go back first." Subai looked at the monk and Gyatso. "Go back first. In fact, if you want to investigate, you can also investigate. There should be videos at Shanghai Railway Station and Nanjing Railway Station to view, and you can also search for people in the train's passenger system, but none of the three chose to do so. After all, sometimes when encountering special things, such as supernatural events, everyone will work hard to dig out, hoping to make a fortune in the real world, but this kind of thing also depends on the situation. The other person sits with you, chats with you, buys you a drink of water, says thank you, and even asks you for the WeChat of two friends. Then you suddenly realize that the other person's appearance is completely blurred, but at the same time, you remember every detail of the other person's clothing. Everything has been explained. The woman named Lankair is a hot potato. If you can't accept it, it's best not to accept it. Otherwise, you will not reap the benefits, and you will have to pay for it. In the real world, are there too many cases where experienced listeners capsize in the gutter? Subai still remembered the scene where the black audience member was shot several times in the head by an ordinary person who was not an audience member. After getting into the taxi, the monk and Gyatso temporarily forgot about Lankair's incident, and started talking about the unfinished things on the train. Subai sat in the passenger seat and listened some. I found that these two monks had actually figured out something, which seemed to be the story of Buddha cutting his flesh to feed the eagles, and they had even determined a location. Buddhism was truly introduced to China during the Eastern Han Dynasty, but Buddhism had already been active in China before. The earliest record recorded in historical documents is that Qin Shi Huang ordered a dozen monks who would preach in the future to be expelled from the country, allowing them to come and go wherever they came from. Monks developed from Central Plains Buddhism, which is the most mainstream Buddhist system in China and is familiar and accepted by the majority of Chinese people. Gyatso is considered to belong to another sect of Buddhism. However, Central Plains Buddhism has changed due to the changing political situation and other reasons. Buddhism has been excluded and exterminated several times in history. Therefore, the scriptures and records of Central Plains Buddhism are often lost. In comparison, Gyatso's side is far away from the Central Plains, and its religion is influenced by the Central Plains dynasty. It is relatively small, so some records and church records can be better preserved. Historically, the Chinese central government's rule over Tibet was only unsatisfactory in terms of depth and duration. It was not until the Qianlong year that a minister in Tibet was established, and the first draw of lots from the Golden Urn formally established the relationship between the central government and the local government in Tibetan areas. Before, Tibet could only have a vassal relationship with the Central Plains dynasty at best. It was nominally subject to the Central Plains dynasty, but in fact it was equivalent to a kind of independence. In the true sense, Tibet was completely controlled by the central government until 1959, when the People's Liberation Army entered Tibet to counter the rebellion. According to Gyatso, there are records in his scriptures that when the 18 monks went to the Qin dynasty to preach, they brought a condor with them in an attempt to offer it to the first emperor in order to please the first emperor and hope to gain the first emperor's approval for their mission in the Qin dynasty. To spread Buddhism, that eagle is said to be one of the animals that Buddha cut off and fed. Coincidentally, historical records, the chronicles of Qin Shi Huang records, Qin Shi Huang in the 33rd year, 214 BC, he expelled the Xiongnu from the northwest, from Yuzhong to the east of the Binghe River, and belonged to the Yinshan Mountains, which was called, for 14 counties. The river above the city was blocked. Meng Tian was also ordered to cross the river to take Jiaok, Yin, Mountain and Beijiazhong and build pavilions and barriers to drive away the wrong people. He was relegated to Chu County in Shizi. No temples are allowed. No temples are allowed. No temples are allowed. No should be the transliteration of the Sanskrit words of Buddha. A Buddhist temple is a Buddhist temple. The main meaning of this passage is that in this year, Qin Shi Huang sent a large army to attack the Xiongnu and occupied the entire Hintao area. Jiaok and Yinshan were equivalent to the gates of the Hintao area. Later, the Chensheng and Wuguang uprising broke out, and the Great Qin Great Wall Legion returned to Xianyang. Only then did the Huns dare to come back and reoccupy the Hintao fearfully. However, because the Hintao was in the hands of the Huns, the Han dynasty was humiliated and suppressed by the Huns for decades because they had a strategic advantage. It was not until Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty that he mobilized the whole country. He was beaten back and finally the loop was taken back. When most people read this record, they will only focus on the first part and ignore the last sentence. At that time, the first emperor issued an edict directly banning Buddhism. I guess the first emperor really disliked bald donkeys. According to the conclusion Subai discussed with the monk, since the death of the first emperor, history has been cut off, and the era of human ancestors with astonishing combat prowess has ended. After that, humans in both the East and the West have become the ordinary people they are today. Any religion, any ethnic group, or any country has lost that terrifying power. Vampires, zombies, goblins, and other ethnic groups have all withdrawn from the stage of history, and an era in which manpower can conquer nature has come to an end. But this happened before the death of the first emperor, which means that the eagle that had eaten the Buddha's flesh was real. The bribery to the first emperor failed, and the 18 monks had to be expelled and returned. Naturally, the eagle was also expelled. However, these 18 people encountered an accident when they returned through an area in Hintao. Then the records about them disappeared, and the whereabouts of the eagle disappeared. On the train, the monk and Gyatso studied the map for a long time because they were looking for the place where the 18 monks had an accident. In the end, they found it based on historical records and religious documents, which is Yinchuan, Ningxiahui, the first assistant of the autonomous region. Subai, who was sitting in the passenger seat, was really frightened by the two top academic monks behind him. How long did it take to actually find one? This efficiency is too terrible. Now the two of them were already discussing when to go to Yinchuan. Of course, Subai would definitely be dragged along. After all, the favors owed to others had to be repaid. While listening to the profound discussion between the two monks, Subai took out his phone and flipped through it. Suddenly, he thought of the name Lancair. Out of boredom, he directly searched for this name in the search column. The search results made Sudbai's pupils shrink immediately. He quickly began to browse the information about this matter, and even found a leaked video. Lankir was in a hotel abroad at the time, and soon after entering the elevator, he strangely pressed all the elevator floors, and then huddled in the corner of the elevator in fear. Then there seemed to be some malfunction in the elevator door. The door could not close automatically, and Lankir seemed to be facing the door in fear. He yelled something, but in the camera lens, there was no one on the other side of the elevator door. After getting out of the elevator, Lankir seemed to be talking to something invisible. She looked very frightened and kept running away from something. All of this was recorded by the hotel surveillance camera. Later, Lankir, after the incident was reported, the police came to conduct a search and found Lankir's body in a water tank on the top floor of a hotel. Sudbai's breathing suddenly stagnated subconsciously. Because he discovered that girl, the girl sitting next to me, is not just as simple as what the monk said. Her target is not on us. She can be seen by us, which itself illustrates a very clear problem. She's targeting us. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 453. When the taxi arrived and got out of the car, Sudbai handed the phone to the monk. After reading it, the monk remained silent and handed the phone to Gyatso. After Gyatso read it, he took a deep breath. At this time, the two eminent monks finally put the Buddha's khandar aside, because it was obvious that the three of them were in trouble. It was just too much to say that they just met by chance, or that it would be fine if they didn't cause trouble. Deceiving myself. A dirty thing that can block the perception of the three of you, a dirty thing that talks to you and touches you without feeling any strangeness at all. This is really terrible. Dabai, if you didn't help her pick up the books, wouldn't this matter have happened? Gyatso looked at Sudbai and asked. Is it wrong to help others? Sudbai shrugged and asked. Sudbai would not bear the blame. Why don't you help because someone's back looks good? An old man's rice bag fell, why don't you help carry it? Gyatso teased with a smile on his lips. The monk was standing aside, deeply convinced. The matter was very serious, but the three of them were not so frightened that they dared not speak. Didn't Mao Mao also say that we should pay attention to the enemy tactically and despise the enemy strategically? They have experienced a lot of weird things, and the three of them are not bad people. They understand that when encountering something, it is better to face it calmly than to panic. Then her ticket happened to be sitting next to me, Sudbai reminded. It seems like she has been targeting us for a long time. This is strange. We haven't done anything harmful recently. Gyatso pondered for a while and continued, she is probably not Lankir. The reason why I told you this name is actually a warning. A warning, Sudbai said, it's like giving you an ultimatum before killing you, and then slowly toying with us to death? So confident. This was what Sudbai couldn't understand the most. If the other party really followed Gyatso's words and wanted to play a cat and mouse game, it would seem reasonable to contact him and others in advance to create psychological pressure. But this is the real world. Regardless of whether she is really Lankir, she has to face three senior listeners. In the real world, there are not many people who dare to play with senior listeners as mice. The other party should not be an audience, otherwise there is no need for her to make so many arrangements and thoughts, just to meet us, the monk analyzed. However, in the real world, such a weird and unknown existence actually appears, which is really shocking. The poor monk was very surprised. It is not uncommon for such existences to exist in the real world, but such existences usually sleep and hide in the ocean or in inaccessible places. If they dare to come out and wander around, the broadcast will not be blind. Soldiers come and cover up the water and earth. Go into the house first. After entering the house, I really don't believe she dares to attack Lao Fang's house, Sudbai said, reaching out and pushing open the iron door. The little guy and Jixiang should be at home at this time, with Jixiang accompanying them. Subai really isn't worried about the little guy's safety. Moreover, the old Fang family's formations were only modified by Fatty and the monk, and most of them are still retained. Even if a high-level audience comes in person, it is not an easy task to break open this turtle shell. However, when Subai pushed open the iron door, he subconsciously stepped back and retreated between the monk and Gyatso. That driver. Subai looked back and saw that the driver who had just parked behind to find money, smoked a cigarette, and the taxi were gone. And in front of it, it was not the door of Lao Fang's house. The surrounding area suddenly turned into a cemetery. The cold wind of late winter whizzed past, blowing up the dead leaves, and at the same time, it also blew into the hearts of Subai and the others. Suddenly seemed chilly. At the same time, Subai's left hand clenched his fist suddenly, and his breathing suddenly became heavy. Opposite, the monk and Gyatso were similar, and their auras suddenly became very unstable. Now things are getting a bit serious. Subai suppressed the trembling in her heart, took out a cigarette, and lit it. I declare again, there is absolutely no way that I picked up that book for her because I saw her beauty. That's what caused this incident. I don't believe that a ghost of this level can attack indiscriminately. But the biggest suspicion now is still on you. The monk sighed and took out the beads. Did you know that girl before? Or, according to you young people, how did you treat her before? Subai smiled slightly, looked at the monk, and said with some surprise, Monk, if you really can't hold it in any longer, I will find you 2 little stars in Shanghai, and then let them sit in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the hotel room on the 50th floor. They hold the handle of the glass window with both hands and their backs are facing you. You enter from behind them and you will see the prosperous Shanghai below. They can give you the pleasure of raping the entire Shanghai. Only in this way can they be worthy of your 20+ years. Years of virginity. The monk was not angry, but asked seriously, even if the poor monk is yearning for it, donor Subai, do you still have so much money? Although the mineral water on the high-speed rail is very expensive, it actually doesn't have much money. You can't even afford a bottle of mineral water, and you still want to find a woman for the poor monk. The poor monk is really moved. Subai and the monk were teasing and sarcastic with each other. The atmosphere of the conversation between the two people became more and more obvious. It was obvious that there was some kind of existence that was stirring up the anger between the two people, causing the two people to lose their former feelings. Elegance and indifference. Subai had a strong control over his emotions except when he was sick. Needless to say, the monk had no need to say more. Now the two of them were sarcastic at each other, and they were signaling something with their eyes. They both saw it clearly in each other's eyes. They also felt their own emotional fluctuations, as if a hand was frantically swaying their inner demons and mobilizing their negative emotions. Even this kind of mobilization made them unable to control it and could only try their best. He remains awake at the altar, but his behavior, movements, and speech are somewhat different from before. Become more impulsive. Become more savage. It also becomes more direct. When Subai was talking to the monk, Gyatso had been lowering his head. Then, he suddenly raised his head, and a wisp of dark flames immediately rose out of his eyes, and Gyatso's body was suddenly stained with it. Demon Yan, he is a Buddha, but he has long been transformed from a Buddha to a demon. An obscure incantation came from Gyatso's mouth, and then the hatchet fell into his hand, and he slashed it down immediately. Buzz. As soon as the knife went down, the surrounding light seemed to change color, and the gloomy ghostly energy was released, and all the stone monuments in the cemetery turned black at this time. Although the three of them have lost their former elegance and grace, their instinct to deal with critical situations is still there. The conversation between the monk and Subai just now was actually more of a diversion, because they knew that the other party seemed to want to do something one by one. Watching them continue to go crazy, this is a kind of bad taste similar to broadcasting, but it is definitely not done by broadcasting, because broadcasting rarely directly intervenes in the real world, but this does not affect Subai, and the monk followed her script to delay time, giving Gyatso a chance to switch his demon body and come out to make the first kill. After Gyatso slashed with his sword, Subai and the monk retreated at the same time. The monk looked solemn, and the threads of Buddhist beads were disconnected and flew away in all directions. Subai held the Hellfire shotgun in both hands and fired continuously at the surroundings. Boom! Everything around seemed to have collapsed at this moment. All around, shadows of dead souls were swaying, howling, suffering, venting, and struggling. The number of dead souls can't be seen at a glance. But all their hatred was focused on Subai and the other three. Subai narrowed his eyes and said, "Monk, please see clearly. Even if I were a stallion who started messing around every day since my penis started to grow hair at the age of 10, I wouldn't be able to cause so many problems for me. A woman who loves and dies for revenge, not to mention, there are many male ghosts here. So many dead souls have focused their hatred on us. What is going on?" The monk also had a puzzled look on his face, and there was already a trace of blood in his eyes. There was nothing that could be done about it. Deep in the whirlpool of ghosts, even a saint would be defiled and his emotions would be aroused. This is normal. The thing is that quantitative changes lead to qualitative changes. I remember that she asked me for the WeChat ads of the two of you. Subai suddenly said at this time, maybe her original target was one of you two, and I am just a soy sauce. A sinister smile appeared on Subai's face. At this moment, his vampire temperament was perfectly revealed. Even a monk would be infected by his emotions, let alone Subai. Now his emotions are constantly flowing towards him. He develops his violent side, but he is still trying hard to restrain himself. The monk took out his mobile phone and quickly opened WeChat and glanced at it. No friends have applied for information. Immediately, the eyes of the monk and Subai fell on Gyatso. Gyatso's chest kept rising and falling, and the muscles on his body kept making bursts of crisp sounds. Soon, he retreated from the demonic state. Come out, in that state, even as a tantric monk, you can't control yourself. Breathing heavily, Gyatso also took out his mobile phone, clicked on WeChat, and then he froze. In his WeChat, there is a friend request. The other person's avatar is that of a beautiful girl. The attached message reads, "Master, do you still remember me?" Gyatso was a little confused for a moment. He didn't recognize the girl in the profile picture at all. Looking up, Gyatso found that Subai and the monk were looking at him with an icy look. This look seemed to say, "Oh, so you are a living Buddha like this." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 454. I really can't think of who it is. Gyatso's voice began to grow thicker, and black blood began to seep out of his skin. It was obvious that the demonic energy in his body was stirring uncontrollably. Even if Gyatso exited the demonic body, it was still difficult to suppress this impulse. Of course, Subai and the monk are also in an intensifying trend now. Even if Subai is also controlling them forcefully, the vampire bloodline and the zombie bloodline are alternately appearing on him, and the expressions on his face are sometimes indifferent and sometimes ferocious. The aura on the monk's body was sometimes calm and sometimes rapid. He clenched his teeth and sweated profusely. Thousands of dead souls were dancing around them. Not to mention the attack power they created, this environment, which was similar to a large dye vat, had given Subai and the three of them enough terrible pressure. Emotions, mentality, and even the blood in the body are showing signs of losing control. This is the plan to forcibly turn the three of them into ghosts and irrational beings. Subai pressed his forehead firmly with one hand, roaring from time to time in his throat, "What should I do? What should I do?" This question was shouted out. At this time, Subai's mind was in a state of confusion. Let alone thinking, he could no longer even speak calmly. The monk raised his hands and poked directly into his eyes. Puff. 2 eyes were gouged out by the monk himself, and they fell on the ground casually. The monk clasped his hands together and sat cross-legged. Amitabha. A Buddha's name carries a faint sound of Buddha, but the Buddha's light is constantly being compressed and cannot be released at all. The monk is so cruel that he digs out his eyes in order to regain his consciousness for a moment. Ha ha ha, you damn monk, you are so damn cruel to yourself. Sudbai laughed loudly, his hands twitched uncontrollably, his fingers had grown sharp zombie nails, and his arm muscles had begun to atrophy and stiffen. Sudbai's laughter was originally a kind of exclamation, but now it looks like he is mocking a big enemy. In fact, the desire to kill in Sudbai's heart is now like a raging fist. The burning fire cannot be suppressed even if it is tried to be suppressed. Similarly, Sudbai knew that Gyatso was also restraining himself. Didn't he see that Gyatso had locked his murderous intention on himself several times in a row and then moved away? Damn, the two of them are like 2 powder keg now, they may explode at any time. If they fail to hold on, they will be coerced by the ghosts around them and become one of the thousands of ghosts. When the time comes, even the audience is useless, they are simply crazy, completely crazy. Fortunately, Sudbai was still a little bit lucky in his heart. Now he just hoped that the monk who had briefly recovered from his sobriety could take advantage of this time to think of a solution. Gyatso knelt down and grabbed his neck with both hands. His nails had pierced into his own flesh and blood flowed out. He closed his lips tightly, closed his eyes, and his whole body was trembling. The monk who recovered his thinking ability immediately began to speak. First, the other party didn't take action on the train, but chose to send us to the wilderness on purpose before taking action. If the other party is really a ghost, it is absolutely impossible for him to be so kind as a woman. Therefore, the poor monk suspected that there was an audience behind the scenes who wanted to kill the 3 of me here. The audience did not dare to hurt the sky and kill people randomly, so it was limited to the 3 of us. Second, although it cannot be determined now, the cause and effect of the other party's action will most likely fall on Gyatso. Now there is a choice. Gyatso dies first, and the other party will definitely remove all ghosts. Sudbai and I have no reason for him to be with you. After death, continue to spawn killers, otherwise you will be punished by the broadcast. When the monk finished saying this, he looked at Gyatso. How dare you kill me? Gyatso roared immediately, his demon body ignited again, and with a draw of the hatchet, he placed it directly on the monk's shoulder. Draw. Sudbai immediately raised his gun and pointed it at Gyatso's head. Now among the 3 of them, the monk dug his eyes out to gain a moment of clarity, while Sudbai and Gyatso have directly turned into impulsive and irritable personalities. The way they speak has changed a long time ago. Gyatso's hatchet, the evil spirit released from the tip of the knife, had cut the monk's neck, and blood flowed out, but it was still not as good as the 2 lines of blood and tears after the monk dug out his eyes. Gyatso's hands were trembling. He was suppressing the anger in his heart and suppressing his impulse to kill. The monk didn't actually say that he was going to deal with him just now, but when he said that he would withdraw his hand if the other party died first, Gyatso naturally acted. He thought that Sudbai and monk might kill him first. In normal times, even if this was the case, Gyatso would fight or retreat calmly, but at this time, it was difficult for him to hold back. He did not directly cut off the monk's head. He was already trying his best to suppress himself. Sudbai let out a roar, pointed the muzzle of the gun downward, no longer aimed at Gyatso, panted heavily, and shouted, "Damn it, we can't kill each other, no matter who the target of that damn bastard is. If we rely on ourselves killing to protect yourself, isn't it like an idiot?" But having said that, when Sudbai raised his head to look at Gyatso again, the blood in his eyes was even richer than before. In fact, in his mind, he was already roaring, "Kill Gyatso. If you kill him, you won't suffer." Just kill Gyatso. If you kill him, you will live. Among the audience, even between Sudbai, the monk, the fat man and Gyatso, when it comes to fundamental interests, especially when the current life and death crisis is involved, what's the harm in stabbing a knife in the back, and the white knife goes in and the red knife comes out? How pitiful God is, how painful Sudbai is enduring now. Gyatso shouted low, dropped the hatchet, and touched the tip of the knife to the ground. Kill me, but I don't have to resist, because I know that if you two join forces, I will definitely die, but I only ask you two to make an oath, Sudbai, in the name of your bloodline, Chi-Lu, in the name of your Buddha's heart. After I die, if you want to get out of trouble, you must ignore the cause and effect of the broadcast, ignore all obstacles, and help me kill the person who set up a trap to kill me. Gyatso let go of his grip and the hatchet fell to the ground. He knelt on one knee. When his knee landed, it made a shallow pit. If you want to kill, do it quickly, I can't bear it any longer. Upon hearing this, Sudbai suddenly raised the muzzle of the gun again and pointed it at Gyatso's head. Confused, Gyatso, Sudbai, your minds have been attacked by fire now, and you are like crazy beasts now. What if the person the other party wants to kill is not you, Gyatso, but one of the poor monks and Sudbai? The other party deliberately only adds you as a friend. Is it possible that it is intentional? I hope to see us fighting among ourselves. Let's see it first. We kill our own people first. After the monk finished speaking these words, he coughed heavily. The veins on his forehead were exposed, and there was a faint flow of dark black. This was a sign of going crazy. Obviously, even if the monk digs out his own eyes, he can only support himself so far. The monk suddenly stood up and grabbed Sudbai's shoulders with both hands. At this time, he was already crazy and his eyes were empty. But Sudbai could feel that the monk was staring at him fiercely. At this moment, the monk's heart was probably filled with thoughts. I thought about killing Sudbai and Gyatso several times. We can die, but we can't die cowardly, and we can't be used as someone else's gun, causing internal strife, and then being laughed at by others. Now, don't worry about that WeChat message, don't worry about that person's conspiracy, don't think about that person, which one of the three of us is going to be killed. Now, what we can do is to go out at all costs, rush out, escape, and return to Lao Fang's home. You must save your own life first before you can take revenge. Only by having your own life can you do anything. Gyatso, the poor monk, and you burn your Dharma body to stimulate your potential with secret methods. Help Sudbai and rush out. Sudbai, if you still have some conscience, take Gyatso and I's broken bodies back and make sure that we don't die before the next story world comes. As long as you can do it, after the next story world, you will owe us the favor before. Write it off with one stroke, the poor monk and Gyatso still owe you a favor. After finishing speaking, the monk screamed like a maniac. The Buddha's light on his body turned into flames and burned fiercely. For a moment, thousands of innocent souls around him retreated. Apparently, they could no longer bear the flames of the monk's Buddhist karma. The pain on the monk's face has also slowed down a lot. Obviously, burning the body and stimulating the potential with secret methods at this time is a kind of relief and a very refreshing feeling, because the suppressed feeling is really too painful. Gyatso glared at Sudbai, and immediately grabbed the hatchet again. The hatchet drew an arc and pierced Gyatso's body from the back. The Buddha's body and the demon's body appeared together, each occupying half, with the Buddha's light and the demon's smoke. Burn together at this time. Me. Gyatso waved his hands constantly like a wild beast, and the flames caused by the burning of Buddha and demon spread out. Together with the monk, he opened up a vacuum area. At this time, Sudbai was not moved at all by the monk and Gyatso, who vowed to protect and leave. Because Sudbai also wanted to burn himself, stimulate his potential, and vent without any scruples, he was already being driven crazy. The monk and Gyatso were actually laughing while burning themselves. They were obviously very happy. This was enough to show how terrifying the previous depression and the madness stirred up in their hearts were. Sudbai's entire face now turned hideous because of this pain. Why didn't I come to burn it? Which of you would take me back? Damn it, you two are bitches. You will burn yourself before I agree. Because, you have experience in this kind of madness, but we don't. You can survive in this environment longer than us, came the monk's answer, and then he and Gyatso opened a path in one direction. Of course, Gyatso agreed. Sudbai. Sudbai suddenly felt that what the two of them said was very reasonable, and he had no way to refute it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 455. The dance floor is noisy, but there are not many people. After all, it is just afternoon. For this nightclub, it is just the dawn, and it is far from waking up. The sound effect is very good, and the DJ is playing full control. Even if the wine glass is placed on the coffee table, you can clearly see the ripples on the surface of the wine. A blond man in a black suit was sitting leaning on a leather sofa with a cigar in his mouth. He was very handsome, the kind of Western handsomeness, and even had an aristocratic temperament flowing through his every move. This is not the temperament of a child from a rich family, nor is it the temperament of a second-generation official, but a kind of nobility that has been accumulated by many generations and is about to be integrated into the blood. Beside him, there were two dancers waiting on him, looking very attentive. This ballroom, at this time, seemed to be open only for him, and all the excitement was only for him. Sorry, I'm late. Before the person arrived, the sound arrived first, and a shadow began to move out from the darkness of the dance hall. The Western man waved his hand, the music stopped, and the DJ, the dancers, and the waiters all retreated. It was obvious that here, even the most wild dancers and the accompanying princesses appeared to be so well trained. The cigar was then thrown on the ground, and a hole was immediately burned out of the expensive carpet on the ground, but the man didn't care. You're a long time late, the man asked reproachfully. Some things have been delayed. A shadow slowly shrouded the sofa. Opposite the Western man, the shadow gradually enlarged and thickened, and finally condensed into the image of a man with thick eyebrows and big eyes. The man had a beard, wore an undershirt and riding boots, and there were muddy patches on the shoes. His body also exudes a sloppy aura despite the stains. A person like this really looks like a protection fee collector in a town, and he is also among the worst offenders in collecting protection fees. Shar did not hide his disdain and looked at the man in front of him with a bit of disdain. This Earl is very strange. You Chinese people seem to have this tradition. You are obviously of noble status, but you like to dress like the lowest slaves. This kind of bad taste is really difficult for me to understand. Sal has a handsome face, a hooked nose, and eyes with strange brilliance. If someone here takes a photo of Sal, he should be able to take a photo of him and look for it among the British royal heirs. Soon you can find his identity and photos, because he is quite high up. Of course, although the current Queen of Great Britain is very old, her body is still very strong. She has been struggling for a long time to adapt to the heir to the first throne, and now he has grey hair. He is old, but his mother is still alive and well, so he can only continue to be called a prince. I'm sorry, Count Shar, but I, Amuri, don't consider myself Chinese. Haha, this is really interesting. A few decades ago, we British did not recognize you as Chinese. You yourself did not dare to say a word and were kept submissive by Beijing. Now we British recognize that you are Chinese. But you yourselves began to deny it and started to make a fuss. This is so interesting. Shar shook his head. Forget it, I don't have the interest to deal with your own nonsense. I just feel that as a listener, in this sequence, you are still interfering with the secular world, and even dare to promote according to you Chinese. Oh no, according to the Chinese, isn't this called setting fire to self-immolation? Well, or perhaps, this Earl has also learned another idiom, which is to take chestnuts from the fire. If you don't eat the chestnuts, you will burn your hands first. Thank you, Lord Earl, for your concern. The Chinese also have an idiom, which is that if you don't enter the tiger's den, you won't get the tiger's cubs. It's up to you. A wooden box appeared in Shar's palm. A cross was carved on the wooden box, and the aura of the formation was very obvious. Putting the wooden box on the coffee table, there are 12 low-level formation scrolls, 3 wind scrolls, 5 fire scrolls, and 4 thunder scrolls. Immediately afterwards, Shar took out 2 more scrolls and placed them on the other side of the coffee table with great ceremony. These 2 scrolls exuded a kind of purifying light, which made people feel warm in their hearts even if they were close to it. As if the whole person has been purified and blessed, becoming carefree. 2 intermediate light magic scrolls. There are a total of 14 scrolls, 12 of which are low-level scrolls and 2 of which are intermediate-level scrolls. These were not exchanged from the WeChat store, but made by the Western magicians themselves. The more powerful the audience, the more useless the things in Wadian are. It is a convenient door for the audience below the senior audience. However, for senior listeners and above, it is difficult to obtain something of great use to them from Wadian. On the one hand, the slightly higher-end props in the Wadian store seem to have been deliberately priced at a high price by the broadcast. This low-level scroll costs 2,000 story points per item in the Wadian store. Not only is it sky-high but the effect is very poor. It belongs to the most inferior category among low-level scrolls. The scroll that is lower than the low-level magic scroll is the apprentice magic scroll. This is very cheap. It costs 50 story points. However, this kind of scroll is only suitable for the audience below the senior audience. If you throw it away, it will be a ball of fire. Or thunder and lightning. But if you want to use the apprentice's magic scroll in a battle at the senior audience level, it is like 2 adults fighting, and one of them is actually holding a tickle. Over the years, both Eastern and Western listener circles have actually not stopped researching and investigating radio, and people have gradually figured out the nature of radio. Strictly speaking, the things in the micro store are like the equipment store in Novice Village. They help experiencers, low-level listeners, and ordinary listeners to get started easily. They are like a kind of fire, helping you to ignite it. As for whether this fire will really be real in the future, how strong your burning can be depends on your own efforts and luck. Therefore, it is difficult for the exchanges in Wadian to continue to satisfy those truly powerful audiences in terms of product quality and cost effectiveness, so many transactions have been born. The forum organization that Lin Zhou belonged to before was a trading platform that traded magic weapons and information. But now these 2 people in the ballroom represent a certain force in the West and a certain force in the East. Trading. Amuri slapped his palm, and 3 crystal-colored human skulls fell on the coffee table. Each skull was emitting a strange light, as if one more glance could make people fall into it. "My Lord Earl, are you still satisfied?" Amuri asked. Inspection completed. Shar nodded and took the 3 human skulls to himself, while Amuri took all the scrolls. This transaction was considered completed. "Your Majesty, I have something else to do, so I'll leave first." After Amuri finished speaking, he immediately turned into a shadow again and disappeared. Shar picked up a cup of brandy on the coffee table, took a sip, stuck out his tongue slightly, and laughed dryly. "You are so brave. You actually want to rely on the national destiny of establishing a new country independently to integrate into your own hands. What a bunch of lunatics. These Orientals are a group of complete lunatics. The image suddenly came to Shatter's mind. The woman in the red cheongsam came over England that morning and directly wiped out a city. The whole of England, no, the strong men of the whole of Western Europe sensed it, and the broadcast was also released. The real mission was to kill her, but no one dared to do it. She just came and left. Even later, she did not die, she still existed. Although she was much lower key than before, she was still alive. However, fortunately, this woman disappeared recently and must have gone to that place. Shar stood up and relaxed his muscles. If this Earl remembers correctly, the location where the aura fluctuated the most before was in the southwest. After waving, a dancer leaned over. The location over there, about 20 kilometers away, where is it? Sir, do you want to travel to Purple Mountain? The dancer said the place. Oh, Purple Mountain. Originally, after the transaction was completed, Shar should go back immediately. As a Western listener, it is always very unsafe for him to stay in the East for a long time. But, he was really curious. Curiosity can kill the cat. A layer of dark clouds floated above the Purple Mountain, and below, it looked even more depressing. On the road that was about to enter the mountain, Shar subconsciously took out the cross he had been wearing before walking in. After walking in, Shar nodded thoughtfully. Is this the blinding formation used by the Easterners? Not far ahead, there is a wooden stake with a pig tied to it. No, no, no. After Earl Shar got closer, he could see clearly that it was not a pig, but a person, but that person was very fat, and his soul should have been suppressed, but he would not be alive at all. It was dangerous, and there was a defensive formation around him to block the approaching resentment from all around. In front of the wooden pile, there is a construction site that has been suspended. However, the construction site is currently covered with strange-looking flags, and resentful souls are howling among them. There are no less than 8,000 resentful souls below. Their resentment, it was absorbed by the banner and projected to another location. God, who are they trying to curse? Where did they find so many resentful souls? Earl Shar suddenly felt that the methods of the Easterners were really much bigger and more advanced than his Western counterparts, and of course, much crazier. My Lord Earl, you shouldn't be here. A Muri's figure appeared behind Earl Shar. Purely curious, Earl Shar waved his hand. He didn't believe that the other party would take action against him because of this matter. Who are you cursing? You are wrong, Lord Earl. We are not cursing anyone. We are just dispelling the resentment of nearly 8,000 resentful souls underground to help them be reincarnated as humans. Otherwise, when they go to hell with resentment, they will only become for the sake of animals. I am the Buddha who is merciful. Earl Shar curled his lips. He was not stupid. How could he not see what kind of battle this was? Then where did you disperse their resentment? According to common sense, the people they met before, the people they just met, and the last few people they met, their breaths are the last things the resentful souls come into contact with and remember, and they will naturally become the places where resentment can be vented and dissipated. If you sacrifice 3 or 2 people to achieve the rebirth of 8,000 resentful souls, the Buddha will also agree. I seem to have heard that there is an eminent monk in Tibet who is also an audience, but he is not on the same path as you apparently. Count Shar had guessed something. Amitabha, sacrificing one's life for righteousness should be the great ambition of my tantric disciples. That fellow monk will be happy to do so. It sounds nice, but it's actually acquiescence. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 456. P.S. This is 2 chapters merged together. It is a large chapter of more than 5,000 words. Long stayed up late at night and wrote it down in one breath. He did not divide it into chapters and simply posted it together. The monk and Gyatso were like the 2 brightest lights in the dark night, dispelling the surrounding haze together. They are wanton, they are indulgent. The two eminent monks are usually solemn, but now, each of them seems to be a madman who has just been released from prison. They are yelling and screaming repeatedly. At the same time, murderous intent bursts out and malice is rampant. There are no longer many Buddhist monk postures, it is really like the return of the devil. Subai gritted his teeth and followed behind. On his body, the zombie bloodline and the vampire bloodline were constantly alternating. Often after suppressing one, the other would suddenly appear. Subai could not allow his bloodline instinct to take over him. Of mind, otherwise you will either become a vampire who only knows how to drink blood or a zombie who only knows how to kill living people to obtain yang energy. At that time, what is waiting for him is the sanction of the broadcast. He may not be able to wait for the next story world. Once the broadcast shows that the task is released, other listeners around him will immediately flock to Subai as they receive the task to please the broadcast. A great way to gain favorability in front of the broadcast. Moreover, even Subai himself did not want to become a beast and lose himself. Otherwise, what is the difference between this and death? Even, this life is worse than death. Two bald donkeys, I really want to take out my cell phone right now and take a picture of you looking bad, to see if you still have the nerve to pretend to be bad in front of me in the future. Subai said viciously, his eyes were sometimes clear and sometimes turbid. Obviously, even with this kind of hard support, he could not hold on for too long. This was because Gyatso and the monk burned their dharma bodies to help Subai attract Jew under the premise of most of the pressure, and now, Gyatso and the monk are almost exhausted. Subai knew what kind of virtue these two people had. Neither the monk nor Gyatso would say that they would completely burn themselves and dedicate themselves. They would definitely leave a breath for themselves in the hope that Subai could bring the two of them back. The half-breathed body was taken out. They didn't want to die, and they would never be so stupid that they would lose their lives for Subai. At that time, Subai not only had to escape alone, but also had to carry 2 oil bottles. This is an agreement. Fortunately, Subai discovered the area where the resentful souls were and could not move. The 3 of them were now away from the center of the resentful souls at the beginning, and were less than a kilometer away from the edge. Normally, Subai would have arrived in just a few leaps, but at this time, Subai desperately suppressed the rebel blood in his body. He staggered even when walking and running, and did not dare to release his true power at all. Otherwise, I might not be able to hold on for half a second. Amitabha. The monk recited the name of the Buddha and immediately fell to the ground. His whole body was extremely weak, as thin as a piece of white paper, and his breath was gone. Of course, there was still residual warmth in his body. This was what He Shang was sure of now. He is using the turtle breathing technique to extend his life. Oh shit! Subai cursed and stretched out his hand to lift the monk's body on his left shoulder. I am powerless. Gyatso let out a sigh, and the hatchet integrated into his body as his natal weapon. He knelt down in front of him, breathless. When Subai passed by, he also picked up Gyatso and put it on his other shoulder. The pressure of the 2 people was on him. Subai felt that his body was getting heavier and heavier. He couldn't help but want to release his power, otherwise he would collapse. But Subai knew better in his heart that he could release his power. At the same time, it will also release the endless negative emotions in his heart. When the time comes, the monk and Gyatso will definitely rest here, and he will become a beast coerced by the resentful souls and resentments. Hold on. Hold on. Subai shouted to himself in his heart. The windbreaker appeared automatically at this time, and it appeared on Subai's body. However, this was not Subai's recruitment, because Subai did not dare to recruit at all at this time. The magical weapon has spirit, and the windbreaker is a very spiritual thing. Although Subai erased the windbreaker's original consciousness when fusing his natal weapon and completely integrated it into his body, Subai did not erase the windbreaker's spirit. This at that time, even if the windbreaker was not alive, it finally lost control. In other words, it was not that the windbreaker lost control, but Sudbai's own emotions and reason were so confused that he began to order the magic weapon on Sudbai's body. Grass. The windbreaker hugged Sudbai and started to fly backwards. Sudbai roared angrily and embedded one hand firmly into the cement floor below to hold back his decline. Gyatso and the monk fell from Sudbai. Sudbai's entire face turned red. He shook his head desperately, but he didn't know what was going on in his mind. Who is it, who is trying to trick me, who is planning to harm me? Sudbai roared like this. Even if he knew that there must be a group of people hiding behind the scenes at this time, watching his angry roar and secretly enjoying themselves, he was like a monkey dancing on a red-hot iron plate for others to appreciate. Now, I can barely control my own magic weapon. All around. The ghost of resentment kept roaring, washing away Sudbai's psychological defense line over and over again, constantly eating away at the rationality deep in Sudbai's heart. Depressed. Depressed. No matter how depressed you are. It's like a sea pouring down from your head. The bodies of Gyatso and the monk are lying on the side. They are now self-immolating, their injuries are extremely serious, and their consciousness has fallen into silence. There is no need to worry about going crazy because of the surrounding environment, but how can the resentful souls and resentments around them be vegetarians? If Sudbai hadn't been around the two of them, countless resentful souls and resentments would have roared out at this moment, eating up the bodies of the monk and Gyatso. In Sudbai's eyes, blood light has occupied more than 90% of the light. The clear light above the spiritual platform is like a candle in the strong wind, which will be extinguished at any time. However, at this moment, Sudbai stopped shouting. Even the windbreaker that had been rebellious calmed down at this time, like a considerate little cotton-padded jacket. Iron it on Sudbai's body. Kneel on one knee on the ground and support the cement floor with both hands. This sudden disaster. It came without any warning, without any rationality. Even Sudbai can't believe it now. The monk and Gyatso, who were talking happily in the car just now, were now dying. This is really a sudden disaster. However, Sudbai showed a smile. He nodded slowly. Dead monk, you figured that I would reach this point, didn't you? You have calculated that even if you and Gyatso burn the Dharma body, they will not be able to successfully open a way for me to leave here, right? You told me before that as long as I can save your two bodies, you will owe me a favor. I was still wondering how you could be so polite. Now, I finally understand. The blood color in Sudbai's eyes began to fade, and his eyes became completely clear and transparent. The fire around him dissipated and disappeared without a trace. The blood of the vampire family was completely gone, and the zombie blood was completely silent. He stood up slowly. Take a deep breath. Like a tired person who has just done many squats in a row on the ground, he feels much more comfortable when he stands up. However, the coldness on Sudbai's body became almost like water droplets dripping from Ning's body at this moment, and every move carried an air of absolute indifference. Biting the tip of his tongue, a mouthful of blood fell down, hitting the cement floor and splashing out. The blood was instantly sucked clean by the resentful spirits around him. Be good, be so good. Daddy still has blood here. Daddy has plenty of it, he. Sudbai smiled and sprayed blood. The resentful souls around him were completely aroused at this time, but Sudbai's expression was as usual, even calmer and calmer than usual. If the monk and Gyatso were awake at this time, looking at Sudbai's current appearance, they would probably be frightened to the point of toothache. This guy got sick again. If he becomes ill, the severity of his madness will be much more ruthless and unscrupulous than the so-called inner demons, and the so-called beasts. At the foot of the Purple Mountain, Earl Shayer was curiously observing a handful of water vapor in front of him. Images were appearing in the water vapor. You are going to deal with that Tibetan monk, but now another monk is dying, and that guy is also possessed by inner demons. This is the death of 3 senior listeners in a row. Could it be that the radio gives special treatment to your Eastern audience circle, so you won't be offended if you play like this? Earl Skull asked, standing behind the 2 speakers like a curious baby. Amuri stood far behind. He was responsible for guarding the subdued fat man. If he killed an audience member less, he would receive less punishment. So they just sealed the fat man who was already seriously injured, and there was no killer. There are 2 speakers, one is very young, about 11 or 12 years old, and the other is very old, about 70 or 80 years old. Earl, this is wrong. We and other fellow apprentices are here just to save these 8,000 dead souls and accumulate merit. If these dead souls or the 8,000 corpses below change, it will be a catastrophe for living beings and the human world. We Buddhists should take it as our duty to save the world and save the people. As for who made those 3 people the last ones to come into contact with these 8,000 corpses, it was beyond our expectation. Now, if these resentful souls want to be reincarnated as human beings, they will not be reduced to the animal way, can only spread resentment to others. They were sealed for a while underground, and the only marks and impressions were those of the 3 people who had just entered the underground. Now it seems that those 3 listeners really suffered an unreasonable disaster. We are also suffering from this, but the 8,000 resentful souls are important, so we can only do this against our will. We believe that the 3 listeners are also sensible people, and they are also people who understand the importance. People should have no regrets despite 9 deaths. The trumpet that looks like a child looks extremely old-fashioned when speaking. Obviously, the real age of this trumpet is more than what it seems on the surface. My Buddha is merciful. Those 3 listeners are fellow disciples. Afterwards, we will definitely perform great sacrifices for them and accumulate great merits together. I hope they can reach bliss as soon as possible, the old trumpet said. At this time, there were only these 2 loudspeakers in this place, as well as Amuri, Earl Shar, and the unconscious fat man. After hearing these words, Earl Skull stuck out his tongue. He used to think that the politicians and congressmen in his country who like to give speeches and like to dress their leather shoes even if they have a layer of dust when appearing in front of the public are hypocritical and disgusting enough. Unexpectedly, in this East, I actually encountered a master-level hypocrite. Earl Shar chuckled and said, I believe this explanation for the time being, but are you as considerate as me when it comes to broadcasting? The young loudspeaker clasped his hands together and said with compassion, if the broadcast offends us, we are willing to be punished. Count Shar was speechless at this moment. He knew exactly what these loudspeakers were trying to do. They insisted that it was an accident, but the radio could definitely understand everything. But the rules of radio were like this. It was omniscient, omnipotent, and pedantic. In addition, these loudspeakers are indeed doing good things, so although the broadcaster will punish those who fall behind, it will not be as serious as deliberately killing 3 senior listeners. It is estimated that these loudspeakers have recognized this punishment in their hearts, but in their view, as long as the Tibetan monk who is dedicated to rooting the red seedlings is eliminated, they can really promote the founding and independence of the country. By then, the country's fortune will be improved. What they gain is far greater than what they lose. Count Chair is already making plans in his mind. If we continue to watch this scene, if these speakers are not seriously affected, and finally achieve their goal and win the national fortune, then, can you also follow the same example? For example, the Scots and the Welsh have wanted to be independent from the British Empire for a long time. It's not like they have no chance. At worst, as a member of the royal family, they can just become the pioneers of national liberation. However, Earl Shar immediately noticed something was wrong and asked, those 2 are useless, and the remaining one has his inner demons in his body and turned into a beast. Why does it feel like something is wrong? He actually dispersed his blood and attracted those resentful people's soul. The young trumpet's face immediately darkened and he said doubtfully, "No, something has changed. This person has not succeeded in becoming a demon. This is not a sign of being invaded by resentment and turning into a beast." The old speaker asked, "But this person has lost all reason. This poor monk can clearly sense this. He has lost all reason." Count Char pointed at the water vapor screen again and asked, "Hey, what is he doing? Going on an outing with 8,000 resentful souls?" The expressions of the young trumpet and the old trumpet suddenly changed. The two were so shocked that they stood up from the ground. They couldn't believe what was happening at this time, because the scene made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. At this time, Amuri no longer looked after the unconscious fat man, but appeared directly behind the two speakers. "Two senior brothers, what is he going to do?" Amuri asked. The two loudspeakers were so frightened that their faces turned white. The older one stretched out his hand tremblingly, his body shaking like chaff, and almost screamed. "He is crazy. He wants to take 8,000 resentful souls who died tragically and were trapped underground for 70 years to the city of Shanghai. Hum, OMG, you Orientals are so terrible. This matter has nothing to do with this count. I am just passing by, just passing by. The radio is up, God is up, it really has nothing to do with this count." Earl Shar was so frightened that he immediately took out a precious space scroll. At this time, he did not hesitate to consume the most precious space scroll among all the scrolls in order to leave this place. He was really frightened, and he was really afraid that the broadcast with the blame is also placed on him. Even if it is just a little bit of blame, he cannot bear it. He must leave quickly, otherwise if the broadcaster determines that he is a party member and jointly responsible, there will really be no place to cry. Amuri was so frightened that he almost sat on the ground, his lips trembled, and he said blankly, "How dare he, how could he still have the ability to act soberly? Shouldn't he be like a wild beast who only knows how to run out and kill? How could he still bewitch and lead a resentful soul? Moreover, how could he take them to downtown Shanghai, where, how many people are there, where, how many living people are there? How could he do this?" The bodies of Gyatso and the monk were carried on Sudbai's shoulders. The resentful spirits around them had left. Under Sudbai's control, they did not eat their bodies. And in front, vaguely visible, a dense black cloud is moving forward, constantly moving forward. Two people on the verge of death, two people who have exhausted all their vitality. What is there to eat? There is only a little bit of blood left. They are like old bacon, with not much oil left. In front is Shanghai, with a population of tens of millions. That is your paradise, that is where you should go. What's the benefit of reincarnation? After reincarnation, are you still you? Come, follow me to Shanghai, go eat people, eat many, many people, eat them one by one and turn them into ghosts, and stay in the world forever. Isn't it the most wonderful thing? Sudbai was walking and talking, with a smile on his face, a very charming smile, and the resentful souls around him naturally followed him. Then, inadvertently, Sudbai turned his head slightly, looked at the top of his head, and said softly, "Come on, let's die together. Come on, let's hurt each other. It's you who make me crazy. I'm crazy. Even I'm scared." At the foot of Purple Mountain, the two loudspeakers and Amuri quickly woke up from the panic. The two loudspeakers began to burn their souls and began to destroy the soul-inducing transcendence magic circle on the construction site as quickly as possible. Muley went crazy and used himself as a seal to block the communication channel between the Underground Research Institute and the surface. He did not hesitate to use his longevity and his own way to cut off the communication between the 8,000 corpses underground. The three of them, at this time, almost used their own lives and their own ways to dismantle and destroy everything they had worked hard to arrange here at all costs. They must make the resentful souls there completely disappear before that madman brings 8,000 resentful souls into Shanghai. Otherwise, if they had thought before that the accidental deaths of 3 listeners would be punishable by the radio, they would be able to withstand and accept it. But if, on top of the deaths of these 3 listeners, plus a city with tens of millions of permanent residents, will even the most populous metropolis be destroyed in one fell swoop? That man is really crazy, really mentally ill, crazy. He really dares to go to Shanghai with his resentful spirit. Quick, at all costs, destroy the formation here, at all costs, destroy the connection between the resentful souls over there, and let the resentful souls over there disappear. Otherwise, my life will be at stake.